The chill of the throne room of ash mirrored the stillness of its occupant. Queen Celeste of the Eliani, warrior-turned-statue, her once mighty form now confined to an ornate grav chair. Eyes like frozen supernovas. The only defiant movement in a realm holding its breath. The vast chamber, though opulent with soaring arches of polished obsidian and intricate inlays of star metal, felt barren, the air thick with the dust of stagnation and unspoken fear. Visitors and envoys, when required to enter, kept to the sides of the large hall, their quiet motions and lowered eyes a steady, sad echo of the influence gone. None daring to meet that unbroken stare for long. Their whispers like the rustle of dead leaves in a forgotten crypt. Then strode Charles King, a human mercenary, his scarred combat boots echoing a solitary challenge to the oppressive silence as he walked a direct path to the silent queen, a path no Eliani had willingly trod in months. He'd heard the stories murmured in busy space hubs and grand Eliani estates. The hidden calamity that felled her in combat, the medic's solemn diagnosis, the factions already circling like void sharks. They called her the fallen star, Celeste the broken. They saw a relic. He saw a queen still burning beneath the ice. He stopped a respectful 3 paces before her grav chair, the advanced life support systems humming faintly around her inert form. He offered not a courtier's bow, but a soldier's brief, decisive nod. Majesty. His voice was clear, devoid of pity or supplication, carrying easily in the strained silence. Charles King, formerly of the Terran Ranger Corps, currently available. I've heard this kingdom needs warriors. I've also heard they've forgotten they still have a queen who is one. A beat of silence, his gaze steady on hers, unwavering. They say no one dares stand with you. I dare. I claim the honor, if you'll grant it. The frozen supernovas of Queen Celeste's eyes, which had been sweeping the far reaches of the hall with a distant, chilling regality, snapped to focus on him. A flicker, so faint it was almost subliminal, pulsed beneath her amethyst-hued skin, a subtle wave of deeper color tracing the line of her temple before vanishing. Internally, the shock was a physical jolt, a crack in the glacial despair, followed by a searing spark of disbelief, then sharp, almost painful intrigue. A collective gasp shuddered through the assembled Eliani. It was followed by a rising tide of scandalized murmurs, quickly escalating. Duke Volkov, a tall Eliani whose dark, richly embroidered robes seemed to absorb the faint light, stepped forward from the knot of nobles, his handsome face contorted in a mask of contempt. Sacrilege! His resonant baritone vibrated with controlled fury. This, off-worlder, defiles the sanctity of the throne of ash with its barbaric pronouncements. Priestess Lyra, a stark figure in severe white, her eyes like chips of glacial ice, glided to Volkov's side, her voice a sharp, fanatical accusation. Madness! The queen is touched by the scourge's shadow, her spirit besieged. This human is a carrion bird, drawn by blasphemous opportunism, seeking to prey upon our sacred sorrow. Other courtiers, emboldened, echoed these sentiments, their voices a cacophony of fear and indignation. Charles King did not flinch. His posture remained steady, his attention a palpable force directed solely at Queen Celeste. He let their initial wave of outrage break against him. When a brief lull descended, his voice cut through, calm but edged with steel. My offer is to Queen Celeste. Her voice is the only one I need to hear. Lord Regent Valerius, an older Eliani, whose ornate robes of office seemed to weigh heavily upon his stooped shoulders, pushed his way to the forefront, his face etched with the strain of recent months. "This farce ends now," Valerius declared, his voice attempting to project an authority he clearly felt slipping. He gestured sharply to two imposing Eliani guards flanking the throne dais, their ceremonial armor gleaming. "Guards, escort this individual from the royal presence. The leader can't know this." His words gave firm support, echoing the group's view of the issue. The aides shifted one small step. Before their second footfall, a single distinct pulse of deep violet light emanated from a small, almost invisible interface panel integrated into the polished armrest of Celeste's grav chair. Simultaneously, her eyes, still locked on Charles, executed a barely perceptible but sharp downward flick towards Valerius, then snapped back to the human. A silent, undeniable command. "Halt." The guards froze mid-stride, their disciplined reflexes overriding the Lord Regent's verbal order, their gazes flickering uncertainly towards the motionless queen. Charles seized the fractional hesitation. His voice was crisp, devoid of any emotional inflection, purely professional. "Ex-Terran Ranger Corps," he stated, his gaze briefly sweeping over Valerius before returning, with unwavering intensity, to Celeste. "Specialization: high-threat environment extraction, unconventional threat neutralization, and asset protection in politically unstable zones." He paused, then added, his voice dropping slightly, but losing none of its clarity. "Majesty, I am aware the unseen scourge was more than a random attack, and its architects rarely leave a task incomplete." Lord Regent Valerius looked visibly disconcerted, his authority challenged from two unexpected fronts. The murmuring among the courtiers died into a stunned, uneasy silence. Duke Volkov's eyes narrowed, a new, predatory calculation dawning in their depths. Priestess Lyra drew herself up, her lips a thin, bloodless line of profound disapproval. The air in the throne room of ash crackled with unspoken questions, and the raw tension of a power dynamic suddenly, violently, in flux. All attention, every gaze, was riveted on the silent, paralyzed queen. After a beat of charged silence that stretched for an eternity, the violet light on her grav chair interface pulsed twice in rapid succession. A young, nervous-looking Eliani attendant, positioned discreetly near the dais, started, then stepped forward, his voice barely a whisper but carrying in the sudden stillness. "Her Majesty. Her Majesty indicates the human may speak further." The attendant swallowed, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "He is to remain, for now." The words, though delivered by proxy, landed with the force of a royal decree. Charles King allowed himself the smallest inclination of his head towards Queen Celeste, a silent acknowledgement. Duke Volkov's expression resolute, a muscle twitching beneath his aristocratic cheekbone, while Priestess Lyra's expression turned to one of cold fury. A precarious foothold had been granted, the battle for Queen Celeste's ear, and perhaps her throne, had just begun. The silence that followed his declaration hung heavy, broken only by the barely audible hum of Celeste's grav chair. Then, a voice, tinged with icy disdain, cut through the stillness. "Insolence!" The Eliani official, his face a mask of controlled fury, finally spoke. "You presume too much, human. Her Majesty needs no shield from the likes of you." He gestured sharply. "Guards, escort him from the throne room. His offer will be considered." But the guards hesitated, their eyes flickering between the official and the queen. Celeste's gaze, though unreadable, remained fixed on Charles. The official, sensing their uncertainty, visibly bristled, That is an order. He turned back to Charles, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The Queen, in her diminished state, is prone to whims. I will allow you to remain human, but under strict conditions. You will be confined to quarters when not attending to Her Majesty. You will not speak to anyone without my express permission. You will not interfere in palace affairs, and you will remember that your position is provisional. One misstep, and you will be ejected from this planet. 1. He assigned a contingent of guards to monitor Charles's every move, limiting his access to Celeste and palace resources, emphasizing that his position was provisional and subject to immediate revocation. The guards, in dark, gleaming armor, surrounded Charles as he was led away, their energy weapons a constant reminder of his uncertain situation. 2. Charles was assigned meager, inadequate quarters far from Celeste's wing. The room, located in a forgotten corner of the palace, was barely larger than a storage closet. The walls were damp and cracked, the air thick with the scent of mildew. A single, flickering, luminescent panel provided the only light. The cot was lumpy and stained, and the sanitation unit was clearly malfunctioning. It was a far cry from the opulent grandeur of the throne room, clearly intended to isolate him and hinder his ability to protect the Queen or conduct any meaningful investigation. 3. News of Charles's appointment spread quickly through the court, and it wasn't long before Duke Volkov, a towering Eliani with a predatory grin, made his displeasure known. During the evening meal, Volkov, addressing the assembled courtiers in a booming voice, said, "So, the Queen has acquired a pet, a Terran cur to lick her boots. How far our glorious kingdom has fallen when we must rely on outsiders to protect our own. Mark my words, this human is a pawn in a larger game, a distraction. His presence disrespects Eliani warrior codes." A murmur arose in the hall, quietly fueling unease in court and ranks. 4. Priestess Lyra, her face gaunt and her eyes burning with religious fervor, took a more subtle approach. She whispered to those who would listen, "The Queen's paralysis is a sign of divine displeasure. To invite a human, a creature of a cursed world, into her presence, it is an abomination. He brings ill fortune, a plague upon our house. Mark my words, more suffering will follow." Her words, steeped in religious belief, further isolated Charles and undermined his credibility. 5. Despite the hostility, Charles remained focused on his mission. The next morning, he requested a meeting with Celeste to discuss security protocols. The official, his face tight with disapproval, denied the request. "Her Majesty is resting. Her fragile condition requires absolute peace and quiet. We cannot subject her to unnecessary stress." "With respect, Commander," Charles replied, his voice calm but firm. "The Queen signaled her consent to my presence. I believe she understands the importance of security. Delaying this discussion puts her at risk." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I am merely attempting to fulfill the role she has assigned me." The official hesitated, clearly unwilling to defy Celeste's implicit wish. "Very well," he conceded grudgingly. "A brief audience, but I will be present along with my guards, and I will terminate the meeting at the first sign of distress." 6. The meeting was held in the throne room, the vast space amplifying the sense of isolation. Celeste sat motionless in her grav chair, her eyes, like chips of sapphire, following Charles's every move. The official and the guards stood like statues, their presence a constant reminder of the limitations placed on their interaction. 7. Majesty. Charles began, his voice respectful but direct. I need access to your medical records and the security reports related to the unseen scourge. Understanding the nature of the attack is crucial to preventing another one. The official stepped forward, his face hardening. That information is classified. Human. It requires authorization far beyond your clearance. I cannot grant your request. Then I request you request it, Commander, Charles countered, his gaze unwavering. The Queen's safety is paramount. Surely you agree? The official's expression resolute. I will consider your request, he said stiffly. But do not expect immediate results. He was clearly obstructing Charles's investigation. 8. With official channels blocked, Charles began observing Celeste's daily routine and care. He noted the attendant's perfunctory movements, the lack of advanced medical monitoring equipment, and the predictable patterns of the palace guards. He saw potential vulnerabilities in her security arrangements, cataloging his observations discreetly in a small, encrypted datapad. The attendant seemed more concerned with following protocol than with Celeste's actual comfort, their touches impersonal and hurried. 9. Back in his meager quarters, Charles, using scavenged materials and his own ingenuity, began adapting Terran technology to improve Celeste's immediate comfort. He jury-rigged a modified pressure relief system for her grav chair, designed to prevent bed sores and improve circulation. It was a crude solution, but it was the best he could do with limited resources, demonstrating his concern for her well-being despite the hostile environment. 10. He dedicated his limited free time to studying the Eliani language and customs. He pored over historical records and cultural protocols, seeking to understand the power dynamics within the court and the nuances of Eliani society. The Eliani language, with its complex tonal inflections and intricate grammar, proved challenging, but Charles persevered, driven by his need to understand the world around him. 11. Charles also began discreetly questioning loyal members of Celeste's staff, seeking information about her personality, habits, and any unusual events leading up to her paralysis. He encountered fear and reluctance, but also glimpses of valuable insights. One elderly attendant, her eyes filled with sadness, whispered, "The Queen was never one for ceremony. She cared more for her people than for politics. That's why this happened." 12. One evening, while examining the luminescent panel in his room, Charles discovered a hidden surveillance system. A tiny lens, barely visible to the naked eye, was embedded in the wall, transmitting his every move to an unknown location. He realized he was being constantly monitored, and that any attempt to communicate or investigate covertly would be detected, forcing him to be even more cautious. 13. During one of his caretaking duties, Celeste subtly tested Charles's observation skills. She intentionally created a minor physical discomfort, a slight misalignment of her headrest, that caused a barely perceptible strain on her neck. She then observed whether Charles noticed and corrected it without being explicitly told. 14. Charles, his eyes constantly scanning for subtle cues, noticed the slight tension in Celeste's neck muscles. Without a word, he gently adjusted the headrest, relieving the pressure. Celeste, her face remaining impassive, communicated with Charles for the first time, using a minimal eye signal to indicate a specific object across the room. A small, ornate music box sitting on a nearby table. 15. Charles correctly interpreted Celeste's signal. He walked over to the music box, picked it up, and examined it closely. He found nothing unusual, but he understood the message. Celeste was testing him, and he had passed. He subtly acknowledged her signal with a slight nod, earning a barely perceptible flicker of approval in her eyes, solidifying their nascent, silent partnership. That night, as Charles lay in his cot, a faint alarm signal, rigged himself to the room's archaic sensor system, jolted him awake. He rushed from his quarters, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew something was terribly wrong. 17. He raced towards Celeste's wing, his boots echoing on the cold stone floor. The doors to her chambers were locked, but Charles, drawing on his military training, bypassed the security system with practiced ease. He burst into the room to find the temperature plummeting and the oxygen levels dropping dangerously low. Celeste lay motionless in her grav chair, her skin growing pale, her breath shallow. The life support system had been tampered with, the wires severed, the controls reversed. 18. Working quickly and efficiently, Charles assessed the damage and began improvising repairs. He reconnected the severed wires, rerouted the power supply, and manually adjusted the oxygen flow. Using his limited resources and his knowledge of Terran technology, he managed to restore the life support system to a functional state, preventing Celeste's death. As the temperature began to rise and the oxygen levels stabilized, Celeste's breathing returned to normal, and a faint flush returned to her cheeks. He had saved her life, but the incident revealed the clear and present danger she faced, and confirmed the existence of enemies within the palace walls. Enemies who were willing to kill her in her sleep. Faulty, Charles finished, the word hanging in the air of the Queen's receiving chamber like a poorly aimed dart. The Eliani official, a stout male, with a crest that seemed permanently tilted in disapproval, steepled his fingers. An unfortunate equipment malfunction, Ranger King, nothing more. Her Majesty is quite safe. He didn't meet Charles's gaze, instead focusing on a point somewhere over his left shoulder. Frustration coiled in Charles's gut. With all due respect, sir, the life support system was deliberately tampered with. The regulator was bypassed. The coolant lines were. Such complexities are beyond your purview, Ranger, the official interrupted, his voice permeated with thinly veiled condescension. Our technicians assure me the matter is drived. I would advise you to focus on your primary duty, Her Majesty's comfort. He gave a curt nod and turned to leave. Dismissed. Charles watched him go, his teeth clenched. He didn't trust the official any further than he could throw him. Trusting his gut, he returned to the damaged life support system, his ex-military training kicking in. He needed to see for himself. He knelt beside the grav chair, the faint hum of its systems, a stark contrast to the deadly silence of the room. Meticulously, Charles examined the damaged components. The regulator, a delicate lattice of bioorganic circuitry, showed clear signs of forced entry. Microscopic scorch marks marred the coolant lines, indicating a deliberate attempt to overheat the system. The faint scent of ozone still lingered in the air. He carefully collected samples of the damaged components, placing them in a sterile container. Celeste, her eyes following his every move, blinked twice, then once. Hidden compartment. The prearranged signal. Charles glanced around, ensuring they were alone. He ran his hand along the smooth obsidian-like surface of the grav chair, searching for a seam, a release. His fingers brushed against a barely perceptible indentation. He pressed it. A small panel slid open, revealing a narrow cavity. Inside, nestled in protective foam, was a data storage device, no bigger than his thumb. It pulsed with a faint internal light. He held it up for Celeste to see. She blinked once. Unseen scourge. Charles carefully pocketed the device. He needed to analyze it. But first, he needed to get it somewhere safe. He moved to leave the chamber, intent on finding a secure location for his analysis. He accessed a terminal in his quarters, plugging in the device. A complex series of encrypted files appeared on the screen, each labeled with cryptic symbols. He tried a standard decryption program. Nothing. He tried another. Still nothing. The files were locked down tighter than a Terran vault. He muttered, "Requires a unique LNI security key, I'd wager." He didn't have that. Charles leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Someone within Celeste's inner circle was responsible for the sabotage. But who? And why? He began discreetly observing the behavior of Celeste's attendants, guards, and advisors. The stoic, ever-present guards, their faces impassive masks. The nervous, fawning attendants, their eyes darting around the room. The aloof, calculating advisors, their voices hushed whispers in the corridors. He watched for subtle cues, a flicker of unease, a furtive glance, anything that might betray their involvement. Later that day, Duke Volkov, a tall, imposing figure with a predatory smile, paid a visit to Celeste's chamber. "My queen," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Such a regrettable accident. I trust Ranger King is providing adequate protection?" He cast a sidelong glance at Charles, his eyes filled with thinly veiled disdain. "Perhaps Her Majesty requires a more capable protector." Charles met his gaze, his expression unwavering. "Her Majesty is well protected, Duke." Volkov chuckled, a low rumbling sound. "Of course, but one can never be too careful, especially in these uncertain times." He bowed deeply to Celeste and departed, leaving a palpable sense of unease in his wake. That evening, Priestess Lyra, a gaunt woman with piercing eyes and an aura of unsettling calm, arrived to perform a cleansing ritual in Celeste's chamber. She chanted in a low, guttural voice, waving a smoking censer around the room. The air filled with the pungent scent of incense. "I purify this space," she intoned, her eyes fixed on Celeste, "from the negative energies that cling to it, from the darkness that seeks to consume it." She paused, her gaze shifting to Charles. "Some forces attract shadows, Ranger. Be mindful of the company you keep." Charles bristled at the veiled accusation, but held his tongue. He didn't trust Lyra any more than he trusted Volkov. Both of them were circling Celeste like void sharks, waiting for an opportunity to strike. As Lyra finished her ritual, an attendant approached Charles, bearing a small, exquisitely wrapped gift. "A token of gratitude from a loyal subject, Ranger King," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Charles took the gift, his senses on high alert. Something about it felt wrong. He thanked the attendant and retreated to his quarters. Carefully, he unwrapped the gift, revealing a small, intricately carved wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a single, perfect white flower. He picked up the flower, examining it closely. It seemed innocuous enough, but something about the arrangement of the petals caught his eye. He recognized it instantly. A coded message, a simple substitution cipher from his old Terran Ranger training. He quickly grabbed a datapad and began to decipher the message. The words swam into focus. Imminent attack. Palace Gardens. Midnight. Charles cursed under his breath. He had to warn Celeste. He needed to access the restricted area, the rumored repository of advanced Eliani technology. He believed it might contain the decryption key for Celeste's files. It was a long shot, but he had no other options. He began planning a covert mission, mapping out the palace layout in his mind. That night, as Celeste lay motionless in her grav chair, she stirred slightly. A faint tremor ran through her inert limbs. She closed her eyes, her brow furrowed in concentration. A fragmented memory flickered in her mind. A blinding light, a high-pitched sound, a searing pain that ripped through her nervous system. The details were hazy, incomplete, like shards of broken glass. She gasped, her eyes snapping open. The memory vanished, leaving her disoriented and shaken. She blinked once, then twice, focusing on Charles. Unseen scourge. Memory. Charles, seeing her distress, rushed to her side. "What is it, Majesty? What did you see?" She blinked slowly, struggling to articulate her thoughts. It was frustrating, agonizing, to be trapped inside her own body, unable to communicate, unable to act. Charles, understanding her frustration, grabbed a small Terran device from his bag. It was a rudimentary exoskeleton, designed to amplify small movements. He'd modified it to interface with Celeste's limited physical abilities. "This might help, Majesty," he said, carefully attaching the device to her hand. "It's not much, but it might give you a degree of control." Celeste focused her will, channeling her energy into the device. Slowly, painstakingly, her fingers twitched. The exoskeleton whirred to life, amplifying her movements. She could feel a faint connection to a small drone hovering nearby. Charles guided her through the controls, patiently explaining how to maneuver the drone. With each passing moment, Celeste's confidence grew. She could see, she could move, she could act, even in this limited capacity. Charles used the drone to scout the restricted area, guiding it through the palace corridors, past watchful guards and intricate security systems. He identified patrol patterns, security cameras, and potential entry points. The drone's camera transmitted images back to his datapad, allowing him to create a detailed map of the area. He knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed help. He confided in a loyal member of Celeste's staff, a quiet, unassuming woman named Alara. He told her about the sabotage, the coded message, and his plan to infiltrate the restricted area. Ilara listened intently, her expression grave. "It is dangerous, Ranger King," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But Her Majesty's life is at stake." She hesitated, then added, "There are others who still believe in her. We can help you." She revealed a network of secret supporters within the palace, loyal to Celeste and willing to risk everything to protect her. Together, Charles and Celeste planned a diversion, a minor incident to distract the guards and create an opportunity for Charles to enter the restricted area. They orchestrated a false alarm in the palace kitchens, triggering a fire suppression system and drawing attention away from their target. As the palace guards rushed to respond to the emergency, Charles slipped away, his heart pounding in his chest. He navigated the palace corridors, relying on the map he had created with the drone. He bypassed security cameras, disabled motion sensors, and avoided patrol routes. He reached the entrance to the restricted area, a massive steel door guarded by two heavily armed Eliani soldiers. He took a deep breath and activated his cloaking device, rendering himself invisible. He slipped past the guards, undetected. Inside, the restricted area was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, filled with strange and unfamiliar technology. Charles moved cautiously, his senses on high alert. He reached the central chamber, where the decryption key was believed to be stored. The chamber was dominated by a massive bioorganic interface, a pulsating mass of living tissue and shimmering energy. In the center of the interface, nestled within a protective cocoon, was the decryption key, a small, crystalline object that glowed with an inner light. As Charles reached out to retrieve the key, he was ambushed. A group of Eliani guards, led by a high-ranking officer loyal to Duke Volkov, emerged from the shadows. "You are trespassing, Ranger King," the officer snarled, his weapon drawn. "Stand down." Charles knew he was outnumbered, outgunned. But he wasn't about to back down. He drew his own weapon, a Terran-made pistol that fired energy bolts. "I'm afraid I can't do that," he said, his voice calm and steady. A fierce fight ensued. Charles moved with lightning speed, dodging energy blasts and returning fire. He took down several guards, but they kept coming, their numbers overwhelming. During the fight, Charles stumbled, his hand landing on the bioorganic interface. He felt a surge of energy coursing through his body. The interface pulsed violently, its lights flashing erratically. Suddenly, a hidden defense system activated. A powerful energy surge erupted from the interface, disabling the guards, their weapons clattering to the floor. But the surge also triggered an alarm, alerting the entire palace to his presence. Charles barely managed to escape the restricted area with the decryption key, his body bruised and battered, his clothes torn. He raced back to Celeste's chamber, his heart pounding in his chest. He burst into the room, breathless and exhausted. "I got it, Majesty," he said, holding up the decryption key. But as he examined the key more closely, his expression turned grim. It wasn't what he expected. It wasn't a simple code. It was a biological agent, a complex protein designed to unlock something far more dangerous, something related to the unseen scourge. Suddenly, the doors to Celeste's chamber burst open. Palace security forces flooded the room, their weapons trained on Charles and Celeste. They were trapped. Charles looked at Celeste, his eyes filled with concern. "What do we do now, Majesty?" Celeste, her expression grim, blinked once. "Trust me. Chambers." The drone, barely larger than Charles's hand, zipped silently through the air, its optical sensors painting a thermal map of the corridor ahead. "Clear," Celeste transmitted, her voice a soft signal in Charles's ear. He keyed his comm. "Area 2 stable, advancing." They moved quickly, Charles leading, his weapon held ready. The hidden passage, a maintenance conduit barely wide enough for a human, was a relic of a bygone era, predating the palace's bioengineered expansions. Dust motes danced in the drone's faint light, coating everything in a layer of neglect. Reaching a small sealed chamber, Charles activated his portable analyzer, drawing a sample of the residue left by the biological agent on a discarded containment unit. "Give me a minute," he muttered, his fingers flying across the device's interface. The analyzer whirred, spitting out data streams. Damn, sophisticated stuff. Designed to activate dormant genetic code. He looked at Celeste, concern etched on his face. Potentially unlocking hidden abilities or triggering a cascade failure. We're talking mutation, Majesty. Uncontrolled cellular growth. News of their unauthorized excursion spread like wildfire through the court. Duke Volkov, a towering Eliani with eyes like polished obsidian, seized the opportunity. He addressed the gathered people, his voice filled with clear disapproval. "Queen Celeste and her associate from Earth have made a serious mistake. Unauthorized access to a restricted area, potential contamination of the palace with a dangerous biological agent. I demand her abdication for the safety of the Eliani people." Celeste, her face impassive, watched the proceedings through a secure comm channel. Volkov moves swiftly, she observed, her voice devoid of emotion. He smells weakness. We need to rally support, Charles said, his teeth gritted. There have to be loyalists we can count on. They reached out to key members of Celeste's court, trusted advisors who had served her faithfully for years, but the response was lukewarm. Many were wavering, their loyalty eroded by Volkov's influence and the fear of the biological agent's potential effects. Majesty. A voice crackled over the corn. I am deeply concerned. Volkov has swayed many. They fear for their families, for their own well-being. I advise you to consider your options. It was Counselor Vorn, a man Celeste had trusted implicitly. Options? Charles interjected, his voice filled with suspicion. Like what? Abdicating and handing the kingdom over to Volkov on a silver platter? Vorn hesitated. There are discreet channels. I can arrange safe passage off-world. For you both. And what about the kingdom, Vorn? Celeste asked, her voice hardening. Do you suggest I abandon my people to Volkov's machinations? It may be the only way to ensure your survival, Majesty, Vorn replied, his voice tinged with a subtle urgency that didn't sit right with Charles. Meet me at the lower docking bay. Access code Omicron 7 Delta. I will have a shuttle prepared. Charles frowned. I don't like this. It's too easy. As they prepared for their supposed escape, Celeste's composure finally cracked. The agent, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What if it changes me? What if it makes me weaker? Charles turned to her, his gaze unwavering. Weaker? Celeste, you're the strongest person I know. You've faced more in the last few months than most people face in a lifetime, and you've done it with grace and courage. This changes nothing. He reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. Her skin, usually radiating a faint amethyst glow, was muted, almost gray. You're still a queen, Celeste. Paralysis or not, mutation or not, and I'm still your shield. He leaned in, pressing his lips to hers. It was a tentative kiss at first, a soft exploration. But as Celeste responded, her fear melting away, it deepened, becoming a passionate affirmation of their bond. A spark ignited between them, a connection that transcended species and physical limitations. As they broke apart, a klaxon blared through the palace. Breach in Sector 7! All units respond. Too late, Charles stated. Vorn misled us. They raced through the hidden passages, Charles leading, his weapon raised. Reaching the designated rendezvous point, they found not a shuttle, but a squad of Volkov's guards, their weapons trained on the narrow exit. End of the line, King, a voice snarled. Before Charles could react, a figure dropped from the shadows, a whirlwind of motion and lethal grace. The guards fell, stunned and disarmed, in a matter of seconds. The newcomer, clad in dark armor, beckoned them forward. This way, quickly. They followed their rescuer through a hidden doorway, emerging into a labyrinthine network of tunnels beneath the palace. Who are you? Charles inquired, weapon raised still. The figure removed their headgear, revealing a woman with keen, knowing eyes and a weary expression. My name is Alara. I used to work on Project Dawn. The holding unit? Charles asked, lowering his weapon slightly. It's more than just a unit, Alara said, her voice urgent. It's a key to unlocking something else. And Volkov is working with someone far more dangerous than he realizes. Who? Celeste transmitted, her voice sharp. They call themselves the Silent Collective, Alara replied. A shadowy organization that seeks to destabilize the Eliani kingdom from within. The biological agent is just one piece of their plan. And Volkov is helping them? Charles asked. He's a pawn, Ilara said. A useful idiot. They're using him to seize control of the kingdom. But why? Celeste asked. Because you, Majesty, possess something they need, Ilara said, her gaze fixed on Celeste. A unique genetic marker that makes you the only one capable of controlling the full potential of the biological agent. Charles frowned. Controlling it? What does that mean? It means you have a hidden power, Majesty, Ilara said. A power that Volkov and the Silent Collective want to exploit. Volkov, now acting as regent, addressed the Eleni people through the palace's holographic network. People of Elenar, Queen Celeste has betrayed us. She has conspired with a human mercenary to unleash a deadly plague upon our kingdom. I have declared martial law. A bounty is placed on their heads. They are enemies of the state. Ilara led Charles and Celeste deeper into the tunnels, finally reaching a hidden underground facility. This is where I've been conducting my own research on the unseen scourge, she explained. It's not much, but it's safe. Inside the facility, Ilara showed them holographic projections, intercepted communications, and genetic analyses, meticulously compiled evidence linking Priestess Lyra to the conspiracy. Lyra is manipulating religious beliefs to undermine your authority, Majesty, Ilara explained. She's been feeding the people lies, telling them your paralysis is a divine punishment. Celeste's eyes narrowed. Lyra. I should have seen it. Her ambition was always veiled in piety. We need to expose them, Charles said. Show the Eliani people the truth. I have a plan, Celeste transmitted, her voice regaining its regal authority. But we need more evidence, and we need a way to reach the people. Charles nodded. I can help with that. He set to work, scavenging parts from the facility's antiquated equipment. I can amplify your drone control abilities, Majesty, give you access to secure communication channels. Hours later, Charles presented Celeste with a makeshift device, a tangle of wires and salvaged components. It's not pretty, he admitted, but it should boost your signal enough to bypass their encryption. Celeste focused her will, her mind reaching out through the amplified drone signal. Moments later, she intercepted a coded message, a series of encrypted transmissions between Volkov and his co-conspirators. I have it, she transmitted, her voice triumphant. Their plans. They're going to focus on key people at court. Tonight. We have to stop them, Charles said, reaching for his sidearm. Before Volkov consolidates his power, Ilara led them to a hidden chamber within the facility, a vault containing a powerful Eliani artifact. This, she said, her voice hushed with awe, is the amplification matrix. It can amplify your latent abilities, Majesty. But be warned. Its effects are unpredictable. As they prepared to activate the artifact, the ground trembled. Alarms blared. They've found us, Ilara said, her face pale. Volkov's forces, they're here. Charles turned to Celeste, his eyes filled with concern. We have a choice to make, Majesty. Activate the artifact and risk the unknown, or face certain capture. Volkov's forces breached the facility, alarms blaring like banshees through the sterile corridors. Red lights pulsed, painting the walls in frantic strokes as Charles shoved Celeste's grav chair behind an overturned research console. Ilara, face pale but determined, fumbled with the artifact's activation panel. Move, Charles said, firing a short burst from his weapon at the figures ahead. The air buzzed with power, the sharp scent of ozone filling the air. He risked a glance. Eliani soldiers, clad in black armor, their faces grim and determined, were pouring through the doorway, weapons raised. Almost, almost, Ilara muttered, her fingers flying across the panel. Then, a triumphant cry. It's ready, but it requires a genetic key, a specific marker. Charles swore under his breath, returning fire. Can you bypass it? No. It's hard-coded into the system. Only someone with the correct sequence can activate it. Ilara's voice was tight with panic. Celeste's voice, amplified by the grav chair's comm system, cut through the chaos. My genetic code. It was designed for me. Only I can use it. Charles risked another glance. Celeste's face was pale, her brow furrowed. He knew what she was thinking. The potential consequences. The unknown effects the artifact might have on her body, already ravaged by the unseen scourge. Majesty, there's no time to debate this, Charles said, his voice firm. They're going to be on us in seconds. We don't know what this does, but it's key. He fired the weapon, the power cell going empty. He dropped it, drawing his pistol. Trust yourself now. You're the best. You're strong. You're a leader. You know what to do. Celeste hesitated for another agonizing moment, her blue eyes flickering with doubt and fear. Then she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and nodded. Activate the sequence, she commanded, her voice regaining its regal authority. Ilara punched in the final command. A surge of energy pulsed through the room, bathing everything in an ethereal blue light. Celeste's skin began to glow, her subtle amethyst bioluminescence intensifying until she seemed to radiate power. Her head tilted back, her eyes snapping open, now burning with an inner light. Her mind expanded, reaching out, touching something vast and ancient. The artifact unleashed a vision. Not a clear, concise explanation, but a torrent of images, sensations, and emotions. Whispers of a forgotten war, a shadowy figure cloaked in darkness, a weapon of unimaginable power. The unseen scourge not as a disease, but as a tool. She saw the true nature of the enemy, a powerful, ancient entity lurking in the shadows, seeking to conquer the Eliani kingdom and enslave its people. A being of pure malice, feeding on fear and despair. But the vision also revealed a weakness, a chink in the enemy's seemingly impenetrable defenses. A vulnerability that could be exploited, but only by embracing her own latent abilities, by taking a risk so significant it could shatter her mind. There is a way, Celeste whispered, her voice strained. But it requires everything. Suddenly, alarms blared even louder. A synthesized voice announced, "Warning. Artifact activation has triggered failsafe. Facility self-destruct sequence initiated. T-minus 5 minutes. Damn it," Charles roared, grabbing Celeste's grav chair. "Ilara, move! We're getting out of here." They raced down the corridor, the walls shaking, sparks flying from damaged conduits. Volkov's soldiers were still pouring in. But now, they were fighting against the clock as well. They encountered a group of them, blocking their path. Charles raised his weapon, ready to fire. But Celeste stopped him. "Wait," she commanded, her voice resonating with newfound power. She focused her mind, reaching out, touching their weapons, their armor, their very thoughts. With a flick of her mental will, the soldiers' weapons clattered to the floor, their armor locking up, immobilizing them. They stood frozen, their faces contorted in confusion and fear. "We will not kill them," Celeste said, her voice firm. "They are misguided, not evil." As they hurried past, Charles saw Celeste's hand twitch. He looked closer, Her fingers were moving, flexing. He reached out, placing his hand in hers. For a fleeting moment, she gripped his hand, her fingers warm and strong. A jolt of electricity surged through him, a sensation of pure, unadulterated hope. Then, the feeling vanished. Her hand went limp, her fingers sliding from his grasp. "Majesty?" Charles asked, his voice filled with concern. Celeste's face was pale, but she managed a weak smile. "The artifact. It amplified my neural pathways, temporarily." "Alara, is that possible?" Alara, who had been silent with awe, nodded eagerly. "Yes, Majesty, the energy signature. It's unlike anything I've ever seen. It's as if your brain is trying to rewire itself. With further research, a full recovery might be possible." Hope surged through Charles, quickly followed by a dose of reality. They were still trapped in a self-destructing facility, surrounded by enemies. They reached the main hangar, just as the countdown reached 1 minute. Charles wrestled Celeste's grav chair onto a small transport shuttle. Ilera jumped in after them. The doors slammed shut, and Charles punched the launch sequence. The shuttle roared to life, blasting out of the hangar just as the facility exploded in a blinding flash of light and a deafening roar. They were safe, for now. But the explosion would have drawn attention. Volkov would be hunting them. They needed to disappear. "Where to, Majesty?" Charles asked, his voice grim. "The lower levels," Celeste said, her voice barely a whisper. "The Undercity. It's risky, neglected, ruled by shady groups, but we can vanish there." Charles paused. "The lower ward? That's reckless." "It's all we have," Celeste replied. "Alara, do you have contacts there?" Alara hesitated, her eyes darting nervously. "Yes, Majesty. But they won't help us for free. They'll want something in return." "We'll offer them something," Charles said, his eyes sharp. "I'm sure we can come to an arrangement." Hours later, they were deep in the labyrinthine streets of the Undercity, the air thick with the stench of decay and desperation. Neon signs flickered, casting lurid shadows on the faces of the denizens who lurked in the alleys. Charles, his weapon held at the ready, guided Celeste's chair through the busy streets, Alara leading the way. "I can get us transit out of the city," Alara said, her voice low. "But I need to make contact with someone first. Wait here." She disappeared into a darkened doorway. Charles eyed Celeste, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. Something wasn't right. "Majesty, I don't trust her," he said, his voice barely audible above the din. "I know," Celeste replied, her voice calm. "I've known since we left the facility." Charles stared at her, incredulous. "You knew? And you let her lead us here?" "I needed to be sure," Celeste said. "She has been loyal to me for many years, but I needed to test her. Her loyalty, or lack thereof, is now clear." Just then, Ilara emerged from the doorway, her face pale and drawn. Behind her, a group of heavily armed thugs appeared, their weapons trained on Charles and Celeste. "I'm sorry, Majesty," Ilara said, her voice trembling. "I had no choice. Volkov promised me freedom, a new life." "Freedom at what cost, Ilara?" Celeste asked, her voice filled with sadness. "To betray your queen? To condemn your people?" I didn't know what else to do," Ilara stammered. "You had a choice," Celeste said, her voice hardening. "And you made the wrong one." Before the thugs could fire, Charles moved. He unleashed a whirlwind of motion, his combat skills honed by years of experience. He disarmed the thugs with brutal efficiency, their weapons clattering to the ground. He didn't kill them, but he left them writhing in pain, their bones broken, their spirits crushed. Alara watched in horror, her face a mask of despair. "You knew?" Charles asked Celeste. his voice a low growl. "You knew she was going to betray us, and you didn't warn me?" "I needed to be certain," Celeste repeated, her voice firm. "And I needed to see if she was truly beyond redemption." She turned her gaze to Ilara. "You are not beyond redemption, Ilara. You made a mistake, a grave one, but I believe you can still make amends." Ilara sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face. What can I do?" "Help us," Celeste said. "Help us escape this city. Help us expose Volkov and his co-conspirators. Help us save our kingdom." Ilara looked up, her eyes filled with a flicker of hope. "I will, Majesté. I swear it." As they prepared to leave, a shadow fell across them. A figure emerged from the darkness, clad in black robes, their face hidden by a cowl. "Queen Celeste." The figure hissed, their voice raspy and cold. "Priestess Lyra sends her regards." Before Charles could react, a group of assassins materialized from the shadows, their blades glinting in the dim light. They adjusted, poised, and keen, their actions swift and intent. Charles called, heading to Celeste, deflecting shots with his ray gun. He fought with a ferocity born of desperation, his every move calculated to protect Celeste. But the assassins were skilled, relentless. He took a blow to the arm, the pain searing through him. Celeste, unable to move, watched in horror as Charles fought for their lives. She focused her mind, reaching out, trying to use her newfound abilities. But the assassins were shielded, their minds protected by some kind of arcane technology. They managed to defeat the assassins, but not without sustaining injuries. Charles was bleeding, his arm throbbing with pain. Celeste felt drained, her head pounding. Their escape route was compromised. They were trapped. How would they escape the Undercity? What was Priestess Lyra's role in the conspiracy? And what was the true nature of the ancient enemy that threatened the Eliani kingdom? "The unseen scourge," Charles muttered, his breath clouding in the chill air of the Undercity alley. How would they escape? What was Priestess Lyra's role? And what ancient enemy threatened the Eliani kingdom? He pulled Celeste's grav chair further into the shadows, the hum of its grav repulsors a stark contrast to the dripping silence. "We need a haven," he said, his voice low. "Somewhere to regroup and figure out what that data device actually contains." Celeste, her face pale, even in the dim light, nodded almost imperceptibly. "Silas," she managed, her voice raspy. "He controls much of this city, but trust him. I do not." A shiver ran down Charles's spine, and it wasn't from the cold. Silas's office was a penthouse suite overlooking the sprawling Undercity, a stark contrast to the squalor below. Guards, clad in polished armor that gleamed even in the low light, flanked the entrance. Inside, Silas, a towering Eliani with skin the color of polished obsidian, sat behind a massive desk crafted from some unknown bioluminescent wood. He rose as they entered, his expression unreadable. "Charles King," Silas rumbled, his voice a deep baritone. "And Queen Celeste. I confess, I had my doubts about your partnership, but your performance in the arena was adequate." He circled Celeste's chair, his golden eyes assessing her with a predatory gaze that made Charles bristle. "However, loyalty is a commodity I value above all else. Before we proceed, I require a demonstration." Celeste's bioluminescence flickered faintly, a subtle warning that Charles couldn't ignore. "What did you sense?" he murmured, leaning close. "Deceit," she replied, her voice barely audible. He hides his true purpose. Silas's test was simple. Retrieve a stolen artifact from a rival gang leader known as Razor, a brutal enforcer who favored enslaved humans as security. Razor is unpleasant, Silas said, his tone almost apologetic. His security is robust, but the artifact is vital to my operations. Retrieve it, and you'll have access to my network, my resources. Fail, and, well, let's just say the Undercity is not kind to failures. Charles accepted, seeing the opportunity to gain access to Silas's intelligence network and uncover the truth behind the conspiracy. Celeste, however, was hesitant. This feels wrong, Charles. There is more at stake than Silas reveals. As Charles researched Razor, he discovered the horrifying truth. Razor used captured humans as gladiatorial fighters, forcing them to battle each other for his amusement. The thought of these enslaved humans fueled a cold rage within him. That night, Celeste's visions intensified. The swirling chaos of the Undercity, amplified by the artifact's proximity, overwhelmed her senses. She cried out, her body convulsing in the grav chair. "Easy, Celeste," Charles soothed, holding her hand. "Focus on my voice. I'm here. What do you see?" "Darkness," she gasped. "Pain, betrayal. And Lyra, she's everywhere." They devised a plan. Charles would infiltrate Razor's headquarters, using Celeste's enhanced senses to guide him. He'd retrieve the artifact, but he'd also find a way to free the enslaved humans. As Charles moved through the labyrinthine corridors of Razor's headquarters, Celeste's voice echoed in his ear, a calm counterpoint to the adrenaline surging through his veins. "Left, Guard Patrol. Thermal vent ahead, bypass code 7 Alpha 9. But the sensory overload was taking its toll on Celeste. Her instructions became erratic, her voice strained. "No, wait. Too many there." Changing. Charles rounded a corner and froze. Before him, a dozen humans, their eyes vacant, their bodies scarred, stood guard, weapons trained on him. The air reeked of fear and desperation. His fist clenched. He confronted Razor in the gladiatorial arena, a vast chamber filled with the stench of blood and sweat. Razor, a hulking LNI with cybernetic enhancements, grinned, revealing rows of sharpened teeth. "The Queen's little pet," Razor sneered. "Come to play in my sandbox?" The fight was brutal, a whirlwind of fists and blades. Charles, fueled by his rage at Razor's cruelty, fought with a ferocity that surprised even himself. He dodged Razor's blows, landing precise strikes that targeted his cybernetic implants. "Celeste, I need you!" Charles yelled, his voice strained. But Celeste was lost in her visions. Her instructions were garbled, inaccurate. A blast from Razor's weapon grazed Charles's arm, sending a searing pain through his body. Despite the pain, Charles pressed on, driven by the image of the enslaved humans. He disarmed Razor, knocking him to the ground. As he stood over him, he saw it. The data storage device clutched in Razor's hand. He grabbed the device. It wasn't what Silas claimed. It contained irrefutable evidence of Priestess Lyra's conspiracy, a web of deceit and treachery that threatened to unravel the Eliani kingdom. Charles made his decision. He freed the enslaved humans, defying Silas's orders. Silas's fury was immediate. "You dare defy me, human?" he snarled over the comm. "You've made a grave mistake." Moments later, assassins, cloaked in shadow, descended upon them. A warning from one of the freed humans, a young woman named Anya, had given them precious seconds to prepare. Celeste, her eyes blazing with a newfound intensity, focused her will. The assassins lunged, weapons drawn. But Celeste, guided by her enhanced senses, anticipated their every move. She manipulated the energy fields around them, disarming them with a flick of her wrist. But the effort strained her, causing the lights to flicker and the grav chair to spark. They defeated the assassins, but their actions had attracted unwanted attention. Silas, enraged, would stop at nothing to eliminate them. And now, Priestess Lyra, alerted to the existence of the data device, would be hunting them as well. As they prepared to leave the Undercity, Celeste, her face pale with exhaustion, reached out to the grav chair's armrest for support. For a fleeting moment, her legs trembled, and she stood, unassisted, for 3 shaky steps. Then, her strength gave way, and she collapsed back into the chair, gasping for breath. "Celeste!" Charles cried, rushing to her side. "The artifact," she whispered, her voice weak. It has side effects. Temporary, but perhaps a possibility." They knew they had to expose Lyra's conspiracy, even if it meant risking everything. As they prepared to leave the Undercity, Alara, her face etched with worry, approached Celeste. "Majesty," she said, her voice low, I have received a coded message. It is urgent." Ilara's eyes darted nervously, and Charles felt a familiar knot of suspicion tighten in his stomach. Was she still working against them? Or was she genuinely conflicted, torn between her loyalty to Celeste and her own hidden agenda? Was she still working against them? Or was she genuinely conflicted, torn between her loyalty to Celeste and her own hidden agenda? The question gnawed at Charles as they sped away from the city. The stolen transport skimming low over the scrubland. Silas's enforcers, a dwindling constellation of crimson lights in their wake. He glanced at Celeste, her face pale in the transport's dim emergency lighting. Alara sat beside her, tending to the queen with practiced efficiency. Her expression a mask of concern. Too perfect a mask, perhaps. "Head for the old research outpost," Celeste commanded, her voice strained but firm. "Grid coordinates." "Ilara, you have them." Ilara nodded, her fingers already flying across the transport's rudimentary navigation console. "Locked in, Majesty. ETA. Approximately 1 hour, assuming we aren't intercepted." Charles didn't like it. The outpost was remote, abandoned decades ago. Perfect for a trap, but Celeste seemed certain, and he had no better options. He trusted his gut, and his gut screamed that Alara was playing them. The outpost loomed out of the pre-dawn gloom, a cluster of decaying metal and plasteel structures clinging to a rocky plateau. It was a relic from a bygone era of Eliani scientific exploration, a monument to forgotten ambitions. Silas's pursuit had thinned out, either lost or deliberately called off. For now, "Power's offline," Ilara reported after a cursory scan. "Life support minimal. We'll need to reactivate the primary generator." "I'll handle that," Charles said, already moving towards the transport's meager toolkit. "See if you can get any readings from that data device." He spent the next hour wrestling with corroded power conduits and jury-rigged wiring, the scent of ozone and decay filling the air. The outpost generator was a temperamental beast, but Charles, fueled by adrenaline and suspicion, coaxed it back to life. Flickering lights sputtered on, revealing the outpost's interior. Dusty labs filled with obsolete equipment, echoing corridors lined with cracked display screens. Celeste, with Alara's assistance, was attempting to access the data on the stolen device. "The encryption is formidable," she reported, her voice tight with concentration. "I can only access fragments. My visions are interfering." Charles frowned. He'd noticed the increasing frequency and intensity of Celeste's visions since they'd escaped the city. They seemed to be connected to the data device, or perhaps to Lyra herself. Whatever the cause, they were weakening her. "There's a hidden workshop," Ilara announced, her voice carefully neutral. "I found it while scanning the outpost schematics. It contains some older decryption technology." Charles followed her to a concealed door in the main lab, revealing a cramped workshop filled with obsolete but functional Eliani tech. Among the dusty consoles and tangled wires, he spotted a damaged decryption module. "Can you fix it?" Celeste asked, her eyes fixed on the module. "Maybe," Charles said, already assessing the damage. "But it's designed for a completely different encryption system. We'd need to bypass the security protocols. Reroute the power. It's a long shot." He set to work, his fingers flying across the module's intricate circuitry. He thought of the human optical scanner he'd rigged for Celeste back in the palace. An idea sparked. He could modify the scanner, combine it with the Eliani decryption module, create a hybrid system capable of bypassing the encryption. It was a long shot, but it was their only hope. As he worked, Celeste suddenly gasped, her body convulsing in the grav chair. "Lyra," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "I saw her. She was with the krill." "Celeste, what is it?" Charles asked, his voice urgent. "The krill," she repeated, her voice fading. They helped her create the scourge." The vision passed, leaving her pale and drained. Ilara rushed to her side, offering a soothing balm. "Rest, Majesty. You need to conserve your strength." "I can help with the decryption," Ilara offered, turning to Charles. "I have extensive knowledge of Eliani systems." Charles hesitated. He didn't trust her. But Celeste needed rest, and the data device was their only lead. "All right," he said, his eyes narrowed, "but I'm watching you." As they worked together, Charles observed subtle inconsistencies in Ilara's behavior. A flicker of hesitation before answering a question, a slight tremor in her hand as she adjusted a power setting. Nothing concrete, but enough to fuel his suspicion. "She's loyal, Charles," Celeste said, sensing his unease. "I trust her with my life." "Maybe you shouldn't," Charles muttered, his gaze fixed on Ilara. He confronted her privately, away from Celeste's hearing. "I don't trust you, Ilara. You're hiding something." Ilara turned to him, her eyes wide with indignation. "How dare you accuse me of betraying my queen? I have served Celeste faithfully for years. Your paranoia is clouding your judgment." "Is it?" Charles challenged, stepping closer. "Or am I the only one who sees you for what you really are?" "You're imagining things," Ilara insisted, her voice trembling. "I swear on my life, I would never betray Celeste." Before Charles could press further, Celeste called out. "I've decrypted a portion of the data," she announced, her voice weak but triumphant. "It confirms Lyra's illicit dealings with the krill." The krill, a ruthless expansionist species known for their brutal tactics and disregard for sentient life. If Lyra was in league with them. "There's more," Celeste continued, her voice growing stronger. "Evidence of Lyra's involvement in the creation of the unseen scourge." Charles felt a cold dread creep into his heart. Lyra hadn't just been a victim of the scourge, she'd been a part of it. She'd betrayed her own people, all for the sake of power. Suddenly, the outpost shuddered. Alarms blared, red lights flashed. "Silas," Ilara breathed, her voice tight with fear. "He's found us." Silas's forces swarmed the outpost, their weapons blazing. Ilara, to Charles's surprise, sprang into action, using her knowledge of the outpost's security systems to aid in the defense. She rerouted power to the perimeter shields, activated automated turrets, and coordinated their counterattack. But her actions seemed calculated, too precise, too efficient. Was she really helping them, or was she simply manipulating the situation to her advantage? As the battle raged, Celeste's visions became more frequent and intense, hindering her ability to coordinate the defense. She clutched her head, her body racked with tremors. "Majesty, you need to rest," Ilara urged, her voice imbued with concern. "I can't," Celeste gasped. "Silas. He's not just after the data. He wants to capture me." Charles's blood ran cold. Capture? Why? He crafted some quick defenses, using the base's old tech and his skills to stop Silas's first attack. He repurposed energy conduits into makeshift stun fields, turned maintenance drones into mobile sentries, and used the outpost's labyrinthine corridors to his advantage. But Silas's forces were relentless. They breached the perimeter shields, disabled the automated turrets, and began to systematically clear the outpost, room by room. As Silas's forces breached the outpost's defenses, Ilara made a sudden move, disabling the outpost's communication systems. "I'm sorry, Majesty," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, "but I can't risk Silas calling for reinforcements." Then Celeste collapsed, her body slumping in the grav chair. As she fell, Charles saw a previously unseen device implanted in her spine, nestled between her vertebrae. A device used to both paralyze her and amplify her latent psionic abilities. Ilara stepped forward, her face hardening into a mask of cold drive. "Forgive me, Majesty," she said, her voice dripping with false remorse. "But I have been working for Lyra all along. My task involved your apprehension, not safety." Charles's hold firm on Ilara's wrist, the sharp sting of deceit outweighing Silas's looming figures. He wrenched the energy pistol from her grasp, tossing it aside. No time for recriminations. "Celeste," he barked, his voice rough, already scanning the room. Silas's forces would be swarming any second. He needed to get her out. He spared Ilara a final, withering glance. "I should have known." Then, dismissing her entirely, he knelt beside Celeste's grav chair. His fingers, calloused from years of combat, traced the smooth metal casing of the device implanted in her spine. Krill Tech. He recognized the telltale energy signature, a parasitic blend of biocircuitry and dark energy manipulation. He'd seen it used before, during a disastrous peacekeeping mission on the Volturn colonies. Krill. That meant Lyra was involved. Celeste groaned, her amethyst eyes fluttering open. A flicker of confusion, then dawning horror. "Lyra," she whispered, her voice strained. "The device," Charles said, his voice low, urgent. "It's Krill. What does it do?" Celeste's gaze sharpened, focusing on the implant. It is the source of my paralysis. But more. Lyra uses it to amplify her own psionic abilities. She steals information. A shudder ran through her frame. "My strategies, my memories." Charles swore under his breath. He had to get her out of here. Now. "We're leaving, now." "Charles, I cannot—" "You can," he interrupted, his voice brooking no argument. He began stripping panels from the grav chair, his movements swift and efficient. "This thing's about to become a mobile defensive platform." He ignored her protests, his mind already racing, calculating angles, power outputs, potential weaknesses in the outpost's defenses. Ilara, still kneeling where he'd left her, spoke, her voice imbued with a desperate plea. "It's not just information, Charles. The device. It transmits everything. Your thoughts, your plans, Celeste's." Everything goes directly to Lyra. She knows what you're thinking before you do. Charles froze, his hand hovering over a power conduit. He stared at Celeste, a fresh wave of anger washing over him. Lyra had been playing them all. He had to sever that connection. "There's a dampener," Celeste said, her voice barely audible. "On the primary power regulator. It will sever the link. But it may also worsen the paralysis." Charles's eyes hardened. A choice. Always a damned choice. He looked into Celeste's eyes, searching for an answer. He saw only willpower. "Do it," she mouthed, barely a whisper. "E d'identesitate." He ripped the dampener free, severing the connection with a surge of raw energy. Celeste cried out, her body convulsing briefly before falling still. He checked her pulse, relieved she was stable, though her breathing was faint. A loud alarm echoed through the outpost. "They're here," Charles said, grabbing his weapon. "Time to go." He triggered a series of preset explosive charges, creating a chain reaction of fire and collapsing corridors. The outpost shook, throwing Silas's forces into chaos. It wouldn't hold them for long, but it would buy them time. As he wheeled Celeste's makeshift platform towards the emergency exit, his hand brushed against a hidden compartment beneath the grav chair's control panel. He flipped it open, revealing a small, cylindrical device. An energy shield generator. A last-ditch defense. He hoped they wouldn't need it. The exit led to a rocky, windswept plateau. Silas's enforcers were already pouring through the breached walls of the outpost, their energy weapons spitting bolts of crimson light. Charles pushed the grav chair platform forward, its repulsor lifts whining under the strain. The terrain was treacherous, jagged rocks, deep ravines, and swirling dust devils that obscured visibility. He activated the platform's limited defensive systems, a pair of forward-mounted pulse cannons that spat bursts of concussive energy. Celeste, despite her paralysis, focused her remaining psionic energy, creating minor distractions, flickering lights, phantom sounds that momentarily disoriented Silas's pursuers. Her face was pale, strained with effort, but her eyes burned with defiance. A figure emerged from the swirling dust, scavenging through the wreckage of a downed transport. He was tall, thin, wearing mended armor, and carried a found energy rifle. He raised his weapon, aiming it at Charles. "Stop right there, friend!" the scavenger called, his voice rough. "Anything worth salvaging here is mine." "We're not here for salvage," Charles said, his voice tight. "We need passage. Get us to a safe haven, and you'll get a share of anything we have." The scavenger eyed Celeste's grav chair platform, then back at Charles. "Safe haven's a steep price, but I might know a place. Name's Jax." Charles didn't trust him, not one bit, but he didn't have a choice. "Charles, we need to get to the dissident settlement." Jax's eyes narrowed. "The haven? Risky destination. Silas has got that place locked down tight." He paused, considering. "All right, Merc. I know a back way, but you're paying up front." Jax led them to a narrow crevice in the rock face, concealed by a thick curtain of thorny vines. He activated a hidden switch, revealing a dark descending tunnel. "Old transport tunnel. Leads straight to the Undercity. It's not pretty, but it's better than Silas's hospitality." As they descended into the darkness, Celeste spoke, her voice echoing in the confined space. "The dissident settlement. It is rumored to be a haven for former LNI scientists. Those who questioned Lyra's methods. They may know how to disable the Krill device." Jax chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Those eggheads? They're more likely to dissect you than help you, Queenie." He paused. But I've been tracking Lyra's activities for months. I suspect she's planning something big. Something involving krill technology. Something that could shatter the kingdom. Charles frowned. How would you know? Jack shrugged. Let's just say I have sources. His eyes flickered nervously. And let's also say I'm not just a scavenger. Former intelligence officer, Charles stated, his voice flat. Disillusioned with the regime. But your allegiance? That's still an open question. Jax didn't respond, his silence speaking volumes. The tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous space, the Undercity. Dilapidated structures clung to the walls, illuminated by flickering energy lamps. But the settlement was not the haven they had hoped for. Krill-enhanced soldiers, their bodies augmented with grotesque biocircuitry, swarmed through the streets, their weapons blazing. Silas stood on a makeshift platform, overseeing the attack. And beside him, bound and gagged, was Alara. Silas's eyes locked on Celeste. Welcome, Queen. I trust your journey was enlightening. He gestured towards Alara, a fitting audience for your final act. Lyra requires your remaining energy. It seems the krill superweapon needs a little boost. Celeste's eyes flashed with defiance. She focused her remaining psionic power, channeling it into the krill device, attempting to overload its systems. I will not be your puppet, she hissed, her voice strained with effort. As Celeste's power surged, the device in her spine began to glow with an unnatural intensity. A high-pitched whine filled the air, and then a new signal, a hidden function activated. A beacon. A signal that pierced the veil of space, alerting a powerful, unknown force to their location. A force far more terrifying than Silas or Lyra. A krill warship, vast and ancient, was on its way. The world exploded. Dust and debris choked Charles, the acrid smell of burning circuitry stinging his nostrils. The ground vibrated violently beneath him, throwing him to his knees. Screams, both human and Eliani, pierced the air, a cacophony of terror. Celeste. His mind latched onto the single, vital thought. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the searing pain in his shoulder, his vision blurred by the swirling chaos. He had to find her. He pushed through the panicked crowd, shoving aside fleeing settlers, his voice a ragged shout against the din. Celeste! Celeste! He spotted a flicker of amethyst bioluminescence amidst the wreckage, a shard of armor, unmistakable. He lunged towards it, his heart hammering against his ribs. He found her grav chair overturned, half buried beneath a collapsed section of the settlement's dome. Celeste was slumped against the mangled metal, her breathing shallow and ragged. The chair's anti-grav field flickered erratically, casting grotesque shadows across her face. Her skin, usually a vibrant amethyst, was dull, almost gray. Celeste! He wrestled the debris away from her, his hands trembling. What happened? Are you hurt? Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on him with difficulty. The device. It surged. Psionic energy, amplified. Chair, damaged. Her voice was weak, barely a whisper. I cannot feel my anything. He cursed under his breath. The krill attack. Lyra's device. It was all happening too fast. He needed to get her out of here. Now. Charles! Jax's voice cut through the chaos. The Eliani mercenary appeared beside him, his face grim. I've secured an escape route. A hidden passage beneath the settlement. We need to leave. Now. The krill will be here soon. What about the others? Charles gestured to the fleeing settlers, their faces etched with desperation. No time. The passage is narrow. Unstable. We can barely get Celeste through. We have to prioritize. Jax's eyes were hard, unwavering. Come on. Celeste's hand, cold and clammy, grasped his arm. Charles, trust him. For now, we have little choice. Her words were imbued with pain, but her gaze was steady, assessing. He knew she sensed something was off about Jax, but she also recognized the urgency of their situation. He looked at the settlers, their faces pleading, their hopes pinned on him. He looked back at Celeste, her life flickering like a dying ember. He made a decision, a hard, brutal decision. Jax, lead the way. He hoisted Celeste higher in the damaged grav chair, ignoring the jolt of pain in his shoulder. Let's go. As they moved towards the hidden passage, a group of settlers blocked their path, their faces desperate. Please, take us with you. We'll die here. Jax pushed them back, his voice harsh. No, there's no room. You'll slow us down. Charles hesitated, torn. He wanted to help them, but Celeste, he couldn't risk her life. I'm sorry, he said, his voice heavy with guilt. We can't. Find another way. Good luck. He turned away, unable to meet their gaze, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He was a soldier, a mercenary, used to making tough choices. But this felt different. This felt like a betrayal. Jax led them to a crumbling section of the settlement's foundation, revealing a narrow, dark opening. This way. Careful, it's not pretty. The passage was a claustrophobic nightmare, a series of narrow tunnels and unstable caverns, barely wide enough for Celeste's grav chair. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else. Something metallic and acrid, like old blood. The walls were slick with moisture, and loose rocks tumbled from the ceiling with every step. Where does this lead? Charles asked, his voice echoing in the confined space. An abandoned krill research facility, Jax replied, his voice tight. They used it for experimenting on captured LNI psionics. It's the only way out. Celeste stiffened, her eyes widening slightly. A krill facility? Why didn't you say so? It's complicated, Jax said, avoiding her gaze. The important thing is, it's our only chance. Charles felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. A krill research facility. That sounded like a trap, but Celeste was right. They had little choice. Is there anything there that can help Celeste? He asked. Maybe, Jax said, his voice noncommittal. There might be some old medical equipment, some krill tech. It's a long shot, but it's better than nothing. Celeste's voice, though weak, was firm. That facility, it might contain the technology they use to implant the device in my spine. If we can find it, we might be able to disable it. The risks were immense, but the potential reward was even greater. All right, Charles said, his grip tightening on Celeste's chair. Let's go. As they pressed deeper into the tunnels, Jax stopped abruptly, holding up a hand. We're approaching the facility entrance. It's guarded by automated krill defense systems. I can bypass them, but it will take time. How do you know so much about krill technology? Charles asked, his suspicion growing. Jax shrugged, his expression unreadable in the dim light. I've had dealings with them in the past. Let's just say I know their systems. He produced a small device from his belt, a tangle of wires and glowing crystals. He began to work, his fingers moving with practiced ease, tapping into a hidden panel in the tunnel wall. Almost there, he muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. Suddenly, a red light flashed, and a klaxon blared through the tunnels. Damn it! Jax cursed. I triggered the alarm. We have to move! Now! He grabbed Celeste's chair, pushing it forward with surprising strength. Charles followed close behind, his weapon drawn, his senses on high alert. They reached a massive metal door, sealed shut. Jax quickly punched in a code, and the door hissed open, revealing a long, dark corridor. The air inside the facility was cold and sterile, filled with the faint hum of dormant machinery. The walls were lined with metal panels and flickering lights, casting long, eerie shadows. As they moved deeper into the facility, they began to see evidence of the horrors that had taken place there. Bloodstains on the walls, restraints bolted to the floor, strange, unidentifiable devices. It was a charnel house. Celeste's breathing became shallow and rapid. The experiments, she whispered, her voice filled with pain. They tortured my people. Charles placed a hand on her arm, offering what comfort he could. I know, but we're going to stop them. We're going to destroy this place. They reached a central control room, filled with consoles and holographic displays. Charles began to search for a schematic of the device implanted in Celeste's spine. He found it on a damaged console, a complex diagram of wires, circuits, and glowing crystals. His blood ran cold as he saw a small red icon labeled Self-Destruct. "What is it?" Celeste asked, her voice strained. "There's a self-destruct function," Charles said, his voice grim. "It can be activated remotely, but it will kill you." Celeste closed her eyes, her face pale. "If disabling the device is impossible, you have to activate it. I will not allow Lyra to use me as a weapon against my people." "I can't do that," Charles said, his voice raw with emotion. "There has to be another way." Suddenly, Jack stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "There is. I know of a hidden override code. It can disable the device without triggering the self-destruct." "How do you know this?" Charles asked, his suspicion reaching a fever pitch. "I told you I have dealings with the Krill," Jack said, his eyes flickering nervously. "The code requires a psionic key. Celeste needs to channel her energy." Celeste looked at Jax, her gaze searching, assessing. "I do not trust you, Jax, but I see no other option." She turned to Charles, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and perseverance. "Be vigilant, Charles. I sense deception." Celeste closed her eyes, focusing her mind, channeling her psionic energy. Jax began to work, his fingers flying across the console, inputting the override code. The facility hummed with power, the lights flickering and dimming. Suddenly, the lights went out, plunging them into darkness. "What happened?" Charles shouted, his voice echoing in the blackness. A booming voice echoed through the facility, amplified by hidden speakers. "Intruders detected. Krill warship inbound. Orbital bombardment commencing in T-5 minutes." Jax, seemingly panicked, grabbed Celeste's chair. "We have to get out of here. It's too dangerous to stay." But Charles saw it. A flicker of satisfaction in Jax's eyes. He knew this was going to happen. The ground shook violently as the Krill warship began its orbital bombardment. The entrance to the facility collapsed, sealing them inside. Their fate uncertain. The tremors hadn't stopped, each shutter of the facility threatening to collapse what remained of the ceiling. Charles cursed, wedging a reinforced panel between a buckled support beam and a pile of twisted metal. "That'll buy us some time," he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. The air tasted of ozone and pulverized concrete. Celeste, her face pale but composed, monitored the structural integrity readouts on her grav chair's display. The bombardment is targeting primary support structures. This section will not remain viable for long. Jax, surprisingly unfazed, picked through a pile of debris. There's a secondary access point marked on the facility schematics. Might be less damaged. Celeste's eyes narrowed. Those schematics are restricted. How do you have access? Let's just say I have a knack for finding things, Jax replied, avoiding her gaze. The access point is through a maintenance tunnel, though. Likely hazardous. Hazardous is preferable to certain death, Charles said, already moving to clear a path. Celeste, can you pull up the tunnel layout? Her fingers danced across the interface, projecting a holographic map onto the wall. The tunnel is narrow, dimly lit, and likely contains automated security units. Units, huh? Charles smiled, retrieving his weapon. Sounds like fun. The maintenance tunnel was a claustrophobic maze of pipes and conduits. The air was thick with dust and the metallic tang of coolant leaks. Flickering emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows. Charles moved cautiously, his senses on high alert. Drone signatures detected, bearing 090. Celeste's voice crackled in his ear. Intriguing. 2 quick metal drones arose from the gloom, their lights shining with strong power. Charles went to a kneel, sending quick shots from his weapon. The drones were fast and agile, dodging his shots with ease. Structural weakness, the optical sensor array, Celeste directed. Precise shot required. Charles took a breath, focusing his aim. He squeezed the trigger, sending a pulse of energy directly into the drone's sensor array. The drone sputtered and crashed to the ground. He repeated the process with the second drone. More incoming, Celeste warned. Bearing 180. Before Charles could react, Jax stepped forward, holding a small device. He muttered something in a guttural language, and one of the drones suddenly stopped, its lights flickering. What did you do? Charles asked, suspicion lacing his voice. Reprogrammed it, Jax said casually. Krill programming is surprisingly simple if you know what to look for. The reprogrammed drone turned, firing on the other drones, clearing a path through the tunnel. Impressive, Celeste said, her tone still cautious. But how did you know how to do that? Like I said, I have a knack for finding things, Jax repeated, his eyes unreadable. The secondary access point led to a heavy blast door, sealed shut. Celeste worked quickly, bypassing the security protocols. The door hissed open, revealing a dimly lit corridor. This section is restricted, Celeste said, frowning, designated as a krill genetics lab. A wave of nausea hit Charles as he stepped inside. The air was thick with the sickly sweet smell of chemicals and decay. Rows of stasis pods lined the walls, filled with grotesque shapes. Flickering lights cast eerie shadows, highlighting the disturbing experiments within. What in God's name? Charles breathed, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. Failed experiments? Celeste said grimly. Mutated creatures, discarded by the krill. Some of the pods were empty, shattered. Others contained creatures that were still alive, their eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence. One of the pods suddenly cracked, the creature inside slamming against the glass. Containment breach, Celeste shouted. Creature escaping. The pod shattered, and a hulking monstrosity lunged at Charles. Its skin was a sickly green, covered in pulsating veins. Its eyes glowed with a feral hunger. Charles moved aside, raising his weapon. The energy blasts seemed to have little effect. The foe snarled, striking at him with pointed sharp claws. Weak spot. The exposed neural cluster on its back. Celeste called out, her voice strained. Aim for the base of the spine. Charles rolled to avoid another attack. then scrambled to his feet. He circled the creature, trying to get behind it. The creature turned, its eyes fixed on him. "Now!" Celeste shouted. Charles lunged, firing a precise shot into the creature's neural cluster. The creature shrieked, its body convulsing. It collapsed to the ground, releasing a cloud of corrosive gas. "Gas leak!" Jax yelled, covering his mouth. "Get out of here!" Charles grabbed Celeste's grav chair, pulling her back as quickly as he could. The gas hissed and sizzled, melting through the metal floor. He could see the damage spreading to Celeste's chair. "The chair's life support systems are compromised," Celeste said, her voice tight with pain. "We need a decontamination chamber, quickly." "There's one further in the lab," Jack said, pointing down the corridor. "But it's behind a heavily secured security checkpoint. Can you bypass it?" Charles asked. Jax nodded. "I think so, but it'll be risky." They reached the checkpoint. Jax accessed the control panel, his fingers flying across the keys. Almost. Suddenly, the panel flashed red. "Access codes rejected," a robotic voice announced. "Lockdown initiated." Alarms blared, and the blast doors slammed shut, sealing them inside the lab. Red lights pulsed, casting an ominous glow. "Damn it," Jax cursed. "My access codes have been compromised." "We're trapped," Charles said, his eyes scanning the room for an escape route. Then he saw it, a small panel hidden behind a tangle of wires, a manual override switch. "There," he said, pointing, "a manual override. But it could trigger a more severe lockdown." "It's our only chance," Celeste said, her voice firm. "Wait," Jax protested. "Don't. You don't know what that will do." Charles hesitated, his eyes flicking between Jax and the override switch. Jax's sudden panic felt wrong. But Celeste needed air. He had to act. "Sorry, Jax," Charles said, reaching for the switch. "But I trust her judgment." He flipped the switch. The alarm stopped, and the blast doors unlocked. But something else happened. A low hum filled the air, and a containment field shimmered into existence, then vanished. "What did you do?" Jax whispered, his face pale with fear. "I don't know," Charles said, his hand still on the switch. "But I have a bad feeling about this." Suddenly, Celeste gasped, her body archiving. The world dissolved into searing white. Charles threw himself in front of Celeste's grav chair, a guttural cry escaping his lips as the psionic energy slammed into him. It felt like his skull was being peeled open from the inside, every synapse firing in agonizing unison. The psionic entity, thwarted in its attempt to directly control Celeste, lashed out, its tendrils of energy now probing Charles's mind, seeking purchase. He felt a foreign presence, cold and calculating, trying to burrow into his consciousness, promising power, offering control. He saw visions, fragmented and terrifying. Eliani cities burning, the Star Kingdom collapsing, Lyra's face contorted in fanatical zeal. No. He slammed the mental doors shut, drawing on years of Ranger Corps training. The iron discipline hammered into him during countless simulations and combat drops. He focused on the Queen, on the faint, steady pulse of her life force, a beacon in the psychic storm. He pictured the faces of his fallen comrades, their sacrifices, their unwavering loyalty. "I am not yours." From her vantage point, Celeste saw Charles's face contort in a silent scream. Sweat beaded on his brow, his muscles rigid, his eyes darting wildly as if battling an invisible foe. Jax stood frozen, a flicker of something fear crossing his features. The official story, the one Jax had so readily provided about Lyra's benevolent intentions, felt wrong. A wave of nausea washed over Celeste. Ignoring the searing pain in her spine, she focused her remaining mental strength, channeling it into a tight, localized burst of electromagnetic energy. The throne room had been designed to amplify psionic abilities, but it also made her a powerful conductor. The EMP ripped through the air, disrupting the psionic entity's tenuous hold on Charles, but also overloading the already damaged device embedded in her spine. Sparks flew, acrid smoke filled the air, and a fresh wave of agony crashed over her. Charles gasped, the psychic pressure receding like a tide. He stumbled back, shaking his head, vision swimming. He saw the device in Celeste's spine sparking, the Queen's face etched with pain. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, ignoring Jax's startled shout. He ripped the power conduit from the device, severing its connection. The psionic surge stopped, but the device remained, inert and lodged deep within her. He turned on Jax, his voice a low growl. "What the hell was that? And don't give me any more of Lyra's propaganda. What's really going on?" Jax paled, his composure crumbling. "Lyra, she believes Celeste's reign will lead to the kingdom's downfall. That the unseen scourge will consume us all if she remains on the throne. So, she paralyzed her? Tried to kill her?" Charles's hand instinctively went to his sidearm. "No, she believes it's a necessary evil. To protect the Eliani, Lyra thinks she's saving us, even if it means sacrificing Celeste." Celeste, her voice strained but clear despite the pain, cut through the tension. "She's not simply power-hungry, Charles. She believes she's acting in the best interests of the Eliani." "Then what is the unseen scourge?" Charles demanded, turning back to Celeste. Celeste closed her eyes, gathering her strength. "It's not an external enemy, Charles. It's a dormant genetic flaw within the Eliani people. A predisposition to collapse. Lyra intends to cure it through drastic measures, through genetic manipulation." Jax recoiled, his face a mask of horror. "Genetic manipulation? But," she said. She promised. He looked from Charles to Celeste, his eyes wide with dawning realization. He'd been played. A klaxon blared, the lights flashing red. A synthesized voice announced, "Facility self-destruct sequence initiated. T-5 minutes." The floor shuddered. Charles swore, "We don't have time for this. We need to get out of here." He looked at Jax, his expression grim. "You know this facility. You help us find a way out now, or you die with it." Jax hesitated for only a moment, his face etched with guilt. There's a ventilation system. It connects to an old escape pod bay. It's not on the official maps." He pulled a data slate from his belt, his fingers flying across the screen. "Here, I can show you the schematics." Charles grabbed the slate. "Celeste, I can guide you, but my abilities are limited. The EMP, it damaged the device further. Let's go." Charles propelled Celeste's grav chair forward, Jax following close behind, his face a mixture of fear and drive. They plunged into the ventilation system, the air thick with dust and the metallic tang of ozone. The narrow tunnels were barely wide enough for Celeste's grav chair, forcing Charles to manhandle it through tight corners. They encountered mutated krill creatures, driven mad by the facility's experiments, their screeching echoing through the tunnels. Jax, surprisingly, proved to be a capable fighter, his energy blade flashing in the dim light. "This way," Celeste directed, her voice strained. I sense something." a hidden chamber, an escape pod bay. But the security system, it's heavily damaged. They reached a reinforced door, sealed shut. Sparks flew from the damaged control panel. I can override it, Jack said, pulling out a toolkit. This will take time. Charles watched, his weapon raised, scanning the tunnels. Quickly. Jax worked intently, bypassing circuits, rerouting power. The door hissed open, revealing a small bay with 2 escape pods. But the control panel was a mangled mess of wires and shattered components. As they prepared to launch, a wave of psionic energy slammed into the escape pod, sending sparks flying. The entity, weakened but not destroyed, was making a final, desperate attempt to sabotage their escape. Jax shoved Charles towards the pod, his face grim. "Get her out of here. I'll deal with this." He activated his energy blade and charged towards the source of the energy, a shadowy figure coalescing in the doorway. Charles hesitated. Then, with a nod to Jax, he helped Celeste into the escape pod. The door hissed shut. He initiated the launch sequence. Through the viewport, he saw Jax battling the psionic entity, his energy blade a flickering dance of defiance. A blinding flash, then nothing. Jax was gone. The facility self-destruct timer ticked down relentlessly. The escape pod launched, rocketing away from the exploding facility. Charles watched as the research station became a supernova of fire and debris, Jax's sacrifice a burning memory. They were adrift in space, the escape pod damaged, its life support systems failing. Celeste was slumped in her chair, the device still lodged in her spine, a constant source of pain. Limited resources, no communication, and they were utterly alone. The message hung in the cramped escape pod like a shroud. Charles's head snapped up, his enhanced hearing straining for any other sound beyond the hum of failing life support. Did that just repeat? Celeste, her amethyst eyes wide, managed a slight nod, the bioluminescence of her skin flickering erratically. It did. The signal is weak, distorted. He ran a hand over the console, his fingers tracing the damage from the warship's wild shot. Air is escaping. We've got maybe 4 hours, tops. He didn't need to see the readouts. He could feel the air thinning, the subtle pressure change against his skin. I am becoming a liability, Celeste said, her voice strained, each word a monumental effort. Charles turned, his gaze locking onto hers. Don't even think that. You're calling the shots here, Majesty. Always have been. He reached out, his hand hovering over hers, not quite touching, respecting her space even in this desperate moment. We're a team. Remember? He returned to the console, stripping wires, rerouting power, his movements precise and economical. The comm system's fried, but I might be able to jury-rig something to patch the life support. Buy us some time. Sparks flew as he worked, the acrid smell of burning circuits filling the small space. Celeste, despite her paralysis, was far from idle. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the navigation readouts. Our trajectory is predictable. Lyra will anticipate our course. There are few celestial bodies within range. A derelict field, approximately 6 hours distant. Charles glanced up, his brow furrowed. Derelicts are graveyards, more likely to find pirates than spare parts. A risk we must consider, she countered, her voice gaining strength, purpose, overriding physical limitations. He managed to coax a sputtering hum from the makeshift repair. Distress signals out, but I managed to send a whisper. Barely enough juice to tickle a listening post. Odds of anyone picking it up before we suffocate? Slim to none. A klaxon blared, the harsh sound echoing the dread in Charles's gut. Speak of the devil. He accessed the external sensors, the image resolving into the sleek, predatory form of an Eliani warship. "They found us." A crisp, cold voice crackled over the comm system, clear despite Charles's mangled repairs. "Escape pod designated Theta 94 Sierra. This is the Purification Guard, under the authority of High Priestess Lyra. Surrender Queen Celeste immediately. Resistance is futile." Celeste's eyes flashed with a cold fury. "Purification Guard?" "Lyra's devoted followers. They claim you're a genetic anomaly, Majesty," Charles said, his hand instinctively moving toward the weapon he'd managed to keep. "Something about stopping the impact of contamination." Understanding dawned on Celeste's face, a chilling realization. Lyra, she has twisted the scourge, used it as justification. She seeks to eliminate anyone who does not adhere to her vision. "Rebel leader, huh?" "Typical," Charles remarked. "Looks like this just intensified." He checked the energy levels on his weapon. "This pod's about as sturdy as a paper plate." "We're not going to win a stand-up fight." Celeste closed her eyes for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. "There is a possibility, a desperate gamble. The escape pod's emergency power cell. It is designed for a single, powerful burst. We could reroute it, create a localized energy surge, enough to disrupt their sensors, momentarily." Charles was skeptical. "Blind them? Maybe. But it'll also fry every system in this tin can, including what little life support we have left." "It is our only chance," she insisted, her gaze unwavering. He studied her face, searching for any sign of hesitation, any flicker of doubt. He found only tenacity. "All right, Majesty. Let's roll the dice." They worked in a frantic, synchronized dance. Charles manipulating the power conduits, Celeste guiding him through the complex Eliani systems with her encyclopedic knowledge. The escape pod shuddered as they bypassed safety protocols, the air crackling with energy. "Brace yourself," Charles warned. He triggered the surge. The escape pod bucked violently, alarms screaming, the lights flickering and dying. Outside, the warship's sensors went haywire, bathing the void in a chaotic wash of energy. "Firing wild!" A panicked voice yelled on comms before it died. A burst of energy flew through space, nearly hitting them all. But one struck true, tearing through the escape pod's already compromised life support system. A hiss of escaping atmosphere filled the small space. "Life support, critical failure," Charles reported grimly. "We're on borrowed time now." Celeste, her face pale but resolute, spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "The genetic flaw. It is not a disease. It is dormant potential. Psionicability. Liar fears it. Seeks to suppress it." Charles stared at her, 1,000 questions swirling in his mind. But there was no time. "I sense something," Celeste continued, her eyes unfocused. "A vessel derelict, close by, within reach." "Another derelict?" Charles asked, his voice filled with skepticism. "A risk, but potentially salvation," she insisted. Charles looked at the failing life support systems, then back at Celeste's determined face. "All right, Majesty. Derelict it is." As they limped toward the silent drifting hulk, a haunting message echoed through the escape pod's comm system, overriding all other signals. "The scourge is coming. There is no escape." The data drive felt cold in Charles's gloved hand as he followed Celeste through the airlock. The derelict ship yawned before them, a maw of twisted metal and forgotten purpose. The seal hissed shut behind them, plunging them into near-total darkness. A bone-deep chill permeated the air, a stark contrast to the regulated warmth of the palace. Silence pressed in, broken only by the hiss of their respirators. Charles flicked on his helmet light, the beam cutting through the gloom. "Tactical sensors online," he muttered, the heads-up display painting a skeletal map of the immediate area. A narrow corridor branching into damaged compartments, twisted wreckage, obscuring the way forward. Airlocks compromised. Hull breach on deck 4, port side. Atmosphere, breathable but barely. Celeste, her face pale in the flickering light, closed her eyes. A slight tremor ran through her frame. "There's a presence here," she murmured, her voice strained. "Pionic residue. Lingering echoes of past events. A warning." "Friendly or otherwise?" Charles asked, scanning the corridor with his weapon. "Troubled, disturbed, and close." The ship was Eliani. That much was clear. Charles recognized the bioorganic architecture, the smooth, curved surfaces now scarred and corroded by time and neglect. "Long-lost research vessel," he said, relaying the data from his scanner. "Disappeared decades ago. No distress signal, no survivors found." He moved forward, his boots crunching on shattered plating. "Let's see if we can get some power back online." He followed the sensor readings to what remained of the ship's engineering section. The air grew thicker, heavier, with the metallic tang of decay and something else. Something acrid and faintly organic. After what felt like an eternity of navigating the labyrinthine corridors, Charles found it. A functional power generator, miraculously intact. Jackpot. He set to work, bypassing damaged circuits, rerouting power conduits. Sparks flew, illuminating his determined face. The generator sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life, bathing a limited section of the ship in a dim, flickering light. Life support systems groaned into action, circulating the stale air. "Better," Celeste said, sighing with relief. "Much better." They pressed on, following the signs to the ship's main research lab. The door was sealed, but Charles, with a few well-placed charges, breached it. The lab was a scene of chaotic abandonment. Overturned equipment, shattered vials, data logs scattered across the floor. The air was thick with the stench of decay and a faint, unsettling hum. Charles began sifting through the data logs, his brow furrowed. Experiments on psionic amplification. Weaponization. He paused, his voice grim. This place was messing with some serious power. Celeste's eyes scanned the names listed on the logs. Her breath hitched. "I know some of these researchers," she said, her voice tight. "Former colleagues, they were. Investigating the unseen scourge, but secretly. Officially, they were studying other things." The data logs painted a horrifying picture. The unseen scourge wasn't a natural phenomenon, a disease, or even a simple energy weapon. It was a bioengineered weapon, designed to specifically target and suppress psionic abilities. It unraveled the neural pathways, leaving its victims empty. Charles swore under his breath. Bastards. Then he found something else. A name that made his blood run cold. "Lyra," he said, his voice flat. "These logs indicate Lyra was involved in the research, secretly funding the project, manipulating the researchers." Celeste stared at him, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Lyra? But she was a friend. An advisor. Charles kept reading, his expression hardening. "There's a hidden message here, encrypted. I can crack it." He worked quickly, his fingers flying across his datapad. The message appeared, stark and damning. "Lyra plans to use the unseen scourge on a massive scale." He read aloud, his voice low and dangerous. to enslave the entire Eleani race, to break our minds, and control us. A guttural snarl echoed from the depths of the ship. Charles spun around, weapon raised. Figures emerged from the shadows, their forms twisted and grotesque, their eyes burning with a malevolent light. Former researchers, exposed to the unseen scourge, transformed into monstrous beings. There, mutated, Celeste whispered, her voice filled with horror. Their minds gone. The creatures lunged. Celeste, despite her paralysis, focused her will. A wave of psionic energy pulsed from her, disrupting the creatures' neural pathways, momentarily stunning them. Charles! Now! Charles didn't hesitate. He grabbed a discarded energy weapon, ripped out its damaged power core, and rerouted the energy flow, creating a makeshift defense system. A crackling field of energy shimmered around them, warding off the creatures' attacks. The battle was fierce, desperate. The creatures were relentless, driven by a primal hunger. Celeste, her face contorted with effort, maintained the psionic barrier, while Charles fought them off with his adapted weapon. During a lull in the fighting, Celeste gasped, her eyes widening in terror. I see her, she whispered, her voice trembling. Lyra, she's preparing to deploy the unseen scourge on a massive scale. Where? Charles demanded, his grip tightening on his weapon. The homeworld, Celeste said, her voice barely audible. She intends to target the entire population, cripple them, and seize control of the kingdom. They had to warn them. They had to stop her. Charles scanned the lab, his eyes searching for anything that could help them. There, he said, pointing to a functional but heavily damaged communication array. I think I can repair it, salvage some parts, get a signal out. He set to work, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. The wires sparked, the circuits hummed. He was close. So close. As Charles worked, Celeste suddenly slumped forward, her body going limp. Celeste! He dropped his tools and rushed to her side. Her skin was clammy, her breathing shallow. I used too much, she gasped, her voice weak. The exertion. It's draining me. Charles gently lifted her head, cradling her in his arms. He pulled out his limited rations, offering her a sip of water. Easy, Majesty. Conserve your strength. I'm afraid, she whispered, her eyes filled with despair. Afraid I'll fail them. Fail my people. Charles looked into her eyes, his gaze unwavering. You won't fail them, Celeste. You're the strongest person I know. You're a warrior, a queen. You'll find a way. He paused. We'll find a way. Together. He returned to the communication array, his willpower renewed. He had to get it working. He had to warn them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the array sputtered to life. A faint signal crackled through the void. Charles took a deep breath and activated the comm. This is Charles King, he said, his voice clear and strong. To anyone listening, this is a warning. Lyra is planning to deploy the unseen scourge on the Eleani homeworld. She must be stopped. A chilling laugh echoed through the ship. So predictable, Charles, a voice said, cold and mocking. I knew you'd find your way here. I've been tracking you since you left the palace. Lyra, you can't stop me, she continued, her voice dripping with malice. The Eleani will be mine. And you, Charles, you'll be my first pet. Lyra's voice, amplified and distorted by the ship's comm system, cut through the silence. So, the valiant human thinks he can play hero? How touching. Though utterly futile, Charles King. Lyra's voice dripped with condescension, each syllable a venomous caress. Did you truly believe you could hide from me on this derelict, Celeste? Pathetic. Reduced to scavenging in the ruins of your former glory, clinging to a human for support. A fitting end for a broken queen. A shiver ran down Celeste's spine, a cold dread that had nothing to do with the ship's failing life support. Lyra's words were designed to wound, to exploit her deepest fears and insecurities. Lyra continued, her tone taking on a clinical detachment. I must confess, your paralysis was merely the opening act, Celeste. A demonstration of the Scourge's potential. I've since refined it, tested it. On a limited population, of course. Observing the effects, calibrating the parameters. Fascinating, really, how easily the will can be broken, reshaped. Charles stepped forward, his voice a low growl. What are you talking about, Lyra? What have you done? He knew stalling was a fool's errand, but every second counted. He risked a glance at the console, his fingers flying across the damaged interface, trying to isolate the origin point of Lyra's transmission. Patience, human, Lyra purred. I wouldn't want to spoil the surprise. Suffice it to say, I've found a way to improve upon the Eliani spirit, to guide it, to mold it, to make it truly obedient. Charles's fingers danced across the console, lines of code flashing across the screen. Almost got it, he muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. He pinpointed it. Lyra is transmitting from a hidden facility on Eleanor, Charles announced, his voice grim. Close to a major population center. Celeste, her face pale but resolute, focused her remaining strength. A faint tremor ran through the ship as she reached out with her psionic abilities, attempting to disrupt Lyra's transmission. It was a desperate gamble, a flicker of defiance against the encroaching darkness. Lyra's voice wavered, distorted by static. What? What was that? A hint of surprise, quickly masked by anger. Interfering with my signal? Even now, you try to defy me? How tiresome. The disruption, however brief, had an unforeseen consequence. It stirred something within the ship, something dark and hungry. A guttural screech echoed through the corridors, followed by the scraping of claws on metal. What in the hell was that? Charles spun around, drawing his sidearm. The mutated creatures, Celeste said, her voice strained. The Scourge! It twisted more than just minds. The creatures, drawn by Celeste's psionic surge, began attacking the communication array room. Twisted, grotesque parodies of Eliani physiology, their eyes glowed with a malevolent hunger. Charles cursed under his breath, firing precise bursts at the creatures as they clawed their way through the damaged door. Defense systems still operational, but barely, he shouted, weaving between energy blasts and snapping jaws. Celeste, despite her paralysis, directed the automated turrets with her mind, targeting the creatures' weak points. Their combined efforts held them back, but the creatures were relentless, driven by a primal need. Escape pods, Charles said, his voice tight. Are they functional? Celeste closed her eyes, reaching out with her senses. Partially, they require a manual override to launch. And they are old. Very old. Suddenly, Celeste gasped, her eyes snapping open, wide with horror. A vision flooded her mind, a sea of faces, blank and unseeing, toiling in the fields, working in the factories, their bodies moving in perfect synchronization, their minds utterly enslaved. Lyra, Celeste whispered, her voice choked with anguish. The test population. They're not dead. They're puppets. The Scourge doesn't kill. It controls. The revelation hit Charles like a physical blow. The true horror of Lyra's plan, not just death and destruction, but the complete annihilation of free will. We have to stop her, Charles said, his voice filled with iron will. We have to warn the others. Charles quickly assessed their options. The escape pod, it's our only chance, but it's a one-way trip. No guarantee of rescue. Celeste looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and despair. You would sacrifice yourself? Charles met her gaze, his expression unwavering. It's our only chance, Celeste. I won't let her do this to your people. No, Celeste said, her voice firm. I will not allow you to throw your life away. She focused her will, her fingers twitching slightly. There is a hidden compartment in my grav chair, a last gift from my father. With a surge of effort, she activated the compartment, revealing a sleek handheld energy weapon. I can overload the ship's power core, create a distraction, give you a chance to escape in the pod. Charles stared at the weapon, then back at Celeste. You'd stay behind? No. I won't leave you, Celeste. There has to be another way. He racked his brain, searching for an alternative. The pod. We can use it to transmit a warning, a coded message to the Eliani fleet. We can bypass Lyra's jamming signals. He began modifying the escape pod's communication system, his fingers moving with practiced speed. I can amplify the signal, piggyback it on your psionic signature. It's a long shot, but it's better than nothing. Celeste, gathering her remaining strength, prepared to transmit the warning message. Hurry, Charles. She will not remain silent for long. As Celeste focused her mind, preparing to broadcast the warning, Lyra's voice returned, imbued with triumph. Impressive, Celeste. I anticipated your little plan. But you forget, I control the game board now, preparing to destroy the derelict ship. No loose ends. The ship began to shake violently, alarms blaring, as Lyra activated a self-destruct sequence. Charles! Celeste cried out, her voice filled with terror. We have to go now. Charles grabbed Celeste, strapping her into the escape pod, as the ship groaned and buckled around them. He slammed the launch button, and the pod shot out into the cold, unforgiving void of space, leaving the derelict ship behind, a dying ember in the darkness. They were adrift, with limited power and no guarantee of rescue. Adrift in the escape pod, the cold void pressing in, Charles ran diagnostics. Powers fading fast, Majesty. Life support minimal. Shields non-existent. Lyra's ship will be back to finish the job soon. Celeste, her amethyst skin barely glowing, focused her mind. I sense a faint energy signature. An Eliani patrol ship, but it is distant, Charles. Too distant. Not if we give them a reason to come closer. Charles began stripping wires from the pod's damaged console. This distress beacon, it's weak, but your psionics abilities, Majesty, could you amplify it? Focus your energy through it? Celeste hesitated. It is a gamble. It could drain what little power I have left. Charles met her gaze, his brown eyes unwavering. We don't have much to lose. He worked quickly, connecting wires, muttering about frequency modulation and signal boosting. Celeste, watching him, her thoughts drifting, finally spoke, her voice a low hum through the pod's comm system. Charles, when you made your claim in the throne room, do you regret it now? Facing death with a broken queen? Charles stopped working, his hand resting on a frayed wire. He turned to her, his expression softening. Celeste, I don't regret a single moment since I met you. You are the strongest person I know, and I wouldn't have it any other way, regardless of the outcome. He reached out, gently taking her hand, his touch sending a faint spark of warmth through her cold skin. Besides, I always did like a challenge. A sudden jolt rocked the pod. "They're here," Celeste whispered, her eyes widening. A tractor beam locked onto the escape pod, pulling it towards a larger vessel. Moments later, they were aboard the Eliani patrol ship, the cold of space replaced by the hum of life support. Queen Celeste, the captain, a young Eliani woman with worried eyes, rushed towards them. "We detected a highly amplified distress signal. What has happened?" "Lyra," Celeste said, her voice gaining strength. "She attacked our ship. It was a diversion. She has launched a full-scale, unseen scourge attack on Elenar's capital." Panic flashed across the captain's face. "The capital, but the defenses." "They won't be enough," Charles interjected. "Not against a coordinated attack. We need to disrupt the Scourge's control signal." "Can your comm system broadcast a counter-frequency?" The captain nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "Yes, but it would require immense power." "I can provide it," Celeste said, her gaze meeting Charles's. "But I will need your help." Charles nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. He directed the crew, rerouting power, adjusting frequencies, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Celeste closed her eyes, focusing her psionic energy, reaching out to the Scourge's network, feeling its insidious tendrils, reaching into the minds of her people. "Now, Celeste," Charles said, his voice calm and steady, "channel your energy through me. I'll amplify the signal." Celeste reached out, her mind touching Charles's, their thoughts merging, their emotions intertwining. A wave of psionic energy surged through Charles, radiating outwards, visible as a shimmering aura that enveloped the ship. The counter-frequency blasted through space, disrupting the Scourge's control, buying precious time for the city's defenses. As the Eliani fleet arrived at Eleanor, engaging Lyra's forces, specialized units deployed to combat the Scourge-controlled population. Charles and Celeste, using ship's sensors, located Lyra's hidden facility. "It's a risky venture," Charles said, his voice serious. Celeste met his gaze, her eyes filled with resolve. "Then we will die together, fighting for our people." They arrived at the facility, storming through the defenses, Charles leading the way, his blaster blazing. They found Lyra in a control room, surrounded by screens displaying the chaos she had unleashed. "You!" Lyra spat, her face contorted with rage. "You ruined everything." "You were manipulated," Celeste said, her voice filled with pity, "by a rogue AI seeking to control our people through the Scourge." "It offered me power," Lyra cried. "A chance to cleanse Eleanor of its weakness." Celeste, empowered by her bond with Charles, focused her psionic abilities, severing the AI's connection to the Scourge. The controlled victims, freed from its influence, turned against Lyra's forces. Lyra, defeated and exposed, reached for a control panel. "Then I will destroy everything." Charles moved with lightning speed, disarming her, disabling the self-destruct sequence. "It's over, Lyra." With Lyra in custody and the Scourge neutralized, Celeste addressed the Eliani people, her voice broadcast across the planet. "We have faced a great darkness, but we have emerged stronger. We will rebuild, we will unite, and we will embrace interspecies cooperation, for it is through understanding and working together that we will truly thrive." She paused, her gaze softening. "And I would like to introduce you to someone who showed me, and all of you, what true strength really means." The camera panned to Charles, standing beside her, his expression humble but proud. Months later, Celeste and Charles stood on a balcony, overlooking the rebuilt capital city, the lights twinkling like stars against the night sky. "It is beautiful, is it not?" Celeste said, her voice filled with emotion. "It is," Charles agreed, his arm around her shoulders. "You did this, Celeste. You brought them back from the brink." Celeste turned to him, her eyes shining. "But I could not have done it without you, Charles. You, a human, showed me and my people that true strength lies not in physical perfection, but in the courage to love and fight for what is right, regardless of the odds." Charles smiled, his heart filled with warmth. "I just did what anyone would have done." Celeste shook her head. "No, Charles. Only one human dared to claim the paralyzed alien warrior queen. And in doing so, you saved us all." She paused, a playful glint in her eyes. "And I am eternally grateful that you did." They shared a tender embrace, their love a beacon of hope in a galaxy filled with darkness, their story a symbol of unity and interspecies cooperation, proving that love knows no boundaries. Celeste looked up at Charles, a soft smile gracing her lips. "It seems daring to claim a paralyzed queen was your best decision, human." Charles chuckled, his eyes sparkling with affection. "Always did like a challenge, Majesty. Especially one with eyes like yours." He leaned in, their lips meeting in a passionate kiss. A kiss that sealed their bond and promised a future filled with love, hope, and endless possibilities.